So I was just reading a little bit more of Donna Haraway's book, Crystals, Fabrics, and Fields, about organicism. Um, and I'm a little worried that no one is going to want to um, help me in this debate, just because, organicism, that approach to biology and philosophy, it's kind of obscure, and, I'm sure there's a few people out there who are interested, but it's definitely considered, or probably considered by most people, a tangent in the mainstream of philosophical or scientific thought. So, you know, but I do have a lot of time to give to this endeavor and to prepare for this debate, because I'm actually writing a paper about organicism, the philosophy and metaphysics of Whitehead, in relation to Francisco Varela's definition of life, autopoiesis, and definition of the mind, the inactive embodied mind, as also an autopoietic system of sorts. And, trying to mesh these ideas together. So I won't necessarily, run into trouble without some help, but I would definitely appreciate some help. I have a feeling that Auton Nano C might be interested, though I'm not actually sure which position he would want to defend, organicism or mechanism. I've been reading some Donna Haraway's book, as I said, and it seems that organicism, a lot of the organicists recognize in Aristotle's natural philosophy certain metaphors, certain ways of describing living systems that are important. And one of those is the teleological understanding of the causes that play a role in the activities of living systems. And at first glance, that sounds a lot like vitalism, which has been pretty well discredited, because vitalism is basically a Cartesian dualism of a very obvious sort, in that it sees this organizing substance existing apart from the entirely mechanized body, physical substance, playing the role of the mechanic to the machine. But organicism is different. Though it still sees living systems as inherently teleological, it sees that telos as being embedded in the flesh itself, in the living flesh. Because, for example, in Varela's cognitive science, which is both a phenomenology of lived experience as well as an empirical study of the nervous system, we see that you can make this distinction between the lived body and the living body. The lived body is you, is your felt experience, being what and who you are. The living body is your flesh and blood, this physical system that we can study and dissect and measure with magnetic imaging devices, and somehow they're the same thing. The living body and the lived body are the same process, but you have to recognize that it's a double-faced process. It has an inside and an outside, not just a geometrical inside, but an experiential inside. So that's what organicism is saying, in contrast to vitalism, which thinks that experience exists independently of the body which houses it. So somehow matter and mind are entwined. They don't exist separately, or at least that's the organicist supposition. That's the working hypothesis. That's the metaphysical, um, assumption that we make. Though you can phenomenologically argue that it's not that much of an assumption. That it really, if you face your direct experience here and now, if you do a phenomenological study on your own first person experience, and there are various methods of doing this. Varela is most well versed in Husserl's phenomenology, and Husserl himself has many different approaches. Static phenomenology, generative phenomenology. Varela also studied Merleau-Ponty, who has his own embodied physiological phenomenology. And Varela also studied Tibetan Buddhism, and was an avid and experienced meditator. So when you do investigate your experience, you find that certain elements of it require an explanation, such that reductionistic materialism as a form of as a philosophy, you could say it's a science, but it's a very philosophical, metaphysically biased science, is leaving out something important. If you face down experience, reductionism, materialistic, mechanistic reductionism seems very narrow, very one-sided, very incomplete, and drastically oversimplified. So, of course, I'm speaking from a perspective, this is my interpretation, and I can't demonstrate empirically to you right now through some prescribed method that's guaranteed to work. I can't prove to you that this is true. And then, but see, that's the thing. We've become so fixated on science and the experimental method, the method of collecting facts and data and so forth, which is very useful. It allows us to invent really amazing technologies. But we've become so fixated on it, we've mistaken it for knowledge, for truth. We've mistaken techne, the Greek word for some practice, some method, some technology, some way of doing. We've mistaken that for knowledge. So people think they're doing science as reductionistic materialists, when really, there's a whole bunch of philosophical baggage attached to that. It's a 17th century Enlightenment paradigm being unconsciously carried to today. Like a lot of reductionistic materialists will say that, Descartes' dualism was completely fallacious, and it's superstitious and supernatural, and yet they study nature, including the human body, the physiology of the human body, as though it were absent of a soul, but they still live their lives, their personal lives, when they're not being professional scientists, and they think they have free will and responsibility, and they love their families and so forth. So that's Cartesian dualism right there. That's what Descartes was describing. So you can't, explicitly deny Cartesian dualism and then unconsciously or tacitly practice it without, being in complete contradiction with yourself. So, that's why vitalism and mechanism both are operating under the same paradigm, as I said in my last video in response to Kyle. They both assume that organisms are machines. Just the vitalists admit that, obviously, based on my own experience as a person, there seems to be this experience that does play a role in the outcome of reality. And so they just, of necessity, see that as rooted in all organisms, and so there's a dualism. Materialism is more consistent, but still